A few times a year in the news or on social media, you hear stories about women in settings where alcohol are involved, being drugged and sexually assaulted. What happens is generally young women are targeted generally by men and are given a drug unwillingly in a drink and then sexually assaulted. Proving sexual assault legally in itself is incredibly hard. When someone is drugged, they might not have a recollection of what has happened to them, which creates this extra layer of disbelief and more of a burden on the victim to prove what actually happened to them. People who are wronged in a society in most other ways receive reparations from the people who hurt them or wronged them in any way. Because we still have this focus of needing incontrovertible proof, it's incredibly hard for these cases to ever reach legal light. Then, ironically, people start taking victims less and less seriously because of the unwavering faith we put in justice. It seems that in no other form of crime are the victims under such scrutiny. When people talk about an issue like this, or really anything related to sexual assault, they're either people who fully put the blame on the victim, or people who attempt to reduce any victim blaming. Both voices are loud, but none, at least to me, seem to offer viable, concrete solutions to stop this from happening. On all sides, there are people either attacking or defending the victim of the crime against them. The people who blame the victim seem to follow a trend of self-righteousness, claiming things like, if that were me, ... These conversations distract from actually allowing justice to take place. Reducing victim blaming is a key step to allowing victims to actually come forward with their struggles. This allows room for the culprits to be considered culprits, instead of spending so much time toying with whether or not you believe a person. There is a push to target the men as well, holding them accountable and trying to prevent these things from happening. However, I believe this work is drastically overshadowed by sensationalizing the victim. Targeting men for changes in their behavior I see as the most important piece towards prevention of drugging and sexual assault. Instead of being focused on what women can do to protect themselves, the conversation should make apparent what men can do to prevent these things. It seems so obvious as to say, don't do this, but that just doesn't work. Unfortunately, it seems like most cases involving drugging aren't handled legally, or at least even made public. In my personal experience with someone who had this happen to them, they were fully aware of the person who did it, and fully aware of where it happened. They were too scared to come forward with it, as when they confided in people they knew, they were met with the same ridicule and disbelief the victims seemed to always face. She was either blamed for what happened to her or just flat out not believed. She didn't feel the case would ever be taken seriously, so she never bothered to report it. Judging how reporting of drugging and sexual assault is handled by the public covers the aspect I consider to be present accountability. Changing present accountability is only one part of a dramatic change to the way our system works, but is only achievable after a crime takes place. What would really help without the need of victims would be better prevention methods. Prevention has historically been put on the victim. As a man, unless you spend time with women, you may never be aware of the informal policy of watching your drinks. Women are told that if they go out, there is a chance that something bad might happen to them, and they need to act in ways that prevent themselves from being drugged. This person I know who was drugged was incredibly cautious of what they were taking in at all times, and yet this happened to them. Prevention on only the level of the victim just doesn't cut it. Another form of protection that is complete avoidance of going out at all, or avoiding certain places if you do. In order to create an environment for women where they feel like they're at risk, that sense of risk needs to be addressed, which I believe in this culture it really hasn't. I believe that a large portion of the risk comes from how we as a society define masculinity in its relation to sex. If you remove the victim from the equation, the perpetrators, who are generally men, are left as the only other factor. People are scared to speak about a change to masculinity, and it's where a lot of insults directed to men who don't conform to the ideal stem from. This acts as a barrier for men to speak out because they fear for their own social status. I was once told that in our society, sex is something that women give and that men take, and if both men and women were givers, there would be a dramatic shift in our culture. In my own life, I've seen this culture ingrained practice where we try to demonize men who aren't overtly sexually active in the form of bullying. Names and insults are tossed around to men who don't get any. Men learn growing up to be a man you need to have multiple sexual partners before you're even 20. As a personal example of growing up with this, whenever I visit my grandparents, they'd always ask me how many girlfriends I had, as if that were a good indication of how far I'd come as a man. When I told them none, they gave a sarcastic response as if I was lying. As a man, I am aware of how men are completely bombarded from the media and other masculine peers telling us to be a James Bond womanizing type. This might come as a shock to people who know me, but retrospectively looking at myself in junior high and high school, I was deeply troubled with this form of masculinity. I felt like an outcast that couldn't relate to other men because I had no conquests. After years of feeling like I wasn't enough of a man, I can say with a great deal of shame that if I were to have sex in those times, it would be 80%, if not more, as a way to relieve the social anxiety I felt towards communicating with other men. What this means is that having sex became a means to an end, and that 80% of my motivation that completely disregards women's thoughts or feelings. I feel myself that I am developing beyond that, spending literal years contemplating these thoughts, and I think it should be recognized that many men may not have the same drive to break out of the prevailing masculine definition of what sex is. So what does any of this have to do with women being drugged? In my view, it's the way that we put pressure on men to have sex, only to have men having sex in order to reduce the societal pressure put on them. This completely removes the piety from the consensual act of two, if it is done as an anxiety relief as opposed to something formed from an interpersonal bond. While this, of course, doesn't happen with every single man in every single case, to say that men aren't affected by this pressure in any capacity is ludicrous to me. This, of course, is not the sole reason for complex issues that a perpetrator might be facing, but changing it, I think, inevitably would create a more comfortable environment for women to exist around men. Creating this atmosphere that it's acceptable for men to take sex because he feels he needs to prove it to society, instead of giving it to someone who wants it, just creates a dangerous atmosphere. I believe that if you were to address masculinity and how it's generally taught, women getting drugged and sexually assaulted could in some part be prevented. Men wouldn't be seeking out sex just to have it, resorting to criminal methods to relieve the social anxiety. The quoted infamous song by the band Sublime, "If it wasn't for date rape, I'd never get laid." I think this nicely summarizes the evolution of the hypermasculine concept of what sex is, and what is taught to young men to aspire to be. Creating a change in this, as I have attempted within myself, I believe will prevent drugging and sexual assault in the future, at least to some extent. Thank you.